Welcome to our webinar about our Opportunity Zone investment in Greenville, South Carolina MSA. Before we get started, let me just give a couple of legal disclaimers. You should read all of this in its entirety, but just to summarize briefly, this investment is only open to accredited investors. It's an equity investment. It involves inherent risks. You could lose money. And none of this is tax advice, investment advice, or legal advice. So with that, let me talk a little bit about the team before we dive into the deal. And I think the team relates to the strategy and how we got here. Many of you know us. Many people on this webinar have invested with us in the past. And you know that Yola and I started this company 5 years ago. We've now grown to roughly 50 manufactured housing communities in 10 states. We have around 80 employees. And we started out buying value add deals, right? Older mobile home parks that needed a lot of work to refurbish them, renovate them, bring them up to kind of their original glory. And we wanted to develop new parks. We'd been talking about it for years. And finally, a few years back, we said, you know what, we need to bring on a partner to handle development. We know how to manage parks, how to sell homes, how to finance parks, but what we don't know is land development. So it makes sense to bring on an expert for that. And we ran a national search, and we were extremely fortunate to get connected with Dean Warhaft. Dean, I'm going to brag about you for a second. I hope you don't blush. Dean is a master developer. He grew up around development and construction from a young age. He is one of the only people I know who's both a licensed attorney and a licensed land surveyor. He has done everything from building the tallest skyscraper in Florida to redeveloping brownfield sites to single family and everything in between. A very creative and thoughtful developer. So we were lucky enough to link up roughly 2 years ago, and we've been building a manufactured housing development business together. So Dean, before I go any further, do you want to give maybe a quick professional intro and also talk about Greenville and how you got into the market?
Sure. First, thanks. You made me sound way better than I am.
I don't think I was exaggerating.
So thank you for that. Yeah, so I am a licensed land surveyor and an attorney. I grew up doing land survey work and working in and around construction sites as a kid, and through college I was a mill worker at night to pay for school, and so I've always been in and around construction. And then actually, when I got out of law school, one of the very first cases I had was with a company out of, I was in Seattle at the time, with a company called Alaska Powder. Was blasting on one side of a mountain to build a new residential development, and all the houses fell down on the other side of the mountain. And so as soon as I started cutting my teeth as an attorney, I found myself back in the land development and construction world, which was where I was always comfortable. And I did a lot of civil engineering in school. I could have gotten a PE, but chose to stick with the legal route. So at some point, a few years into being a lawyer, I decided I would go back and get my surveyor's license and kind of marry the two up. So it makes me one of less than 30 people in the country that I know of that are land surveyor attorneys. And I don't know if that means that it's just a dead profession, or that it's just not something that's commonly put together, but they truly do go together. It's a beautiful marriage of understanding the land and the law. And it fits really nicely into things like this, which is what I call horizontal development, because it's a lot of civil work. So speaking of that, and speaking of civil work, is how I ended up in the South Carolina market. I was looking for light industrial sites to build in the South Carolina area. And while I was there, my broker introduced me to an environmental site that he felt should potentially be a light industrial site. It ended up being, it's the largest Superfund site in the state of South Carolina, or it was when me and partners started working on it. We were able to get it's 250 acres. We were able to get a huge portion of the land delisted from what's called the National Priority List, and then entered into the brownfield program. We layered on a bunch of different tax credits and other things, and eventually ended up bringing in as a major joint venture partner, another development company that I'm friends with, the ownership group called 13th Floor Development, pretty big company in the southeastern United States. And so that project is in Greenville, and it's actually just getting ready to break ground. And the next phase is actually just getting ready to be delisted by the EPA. So there will only be a couple of acres left in the on the national priority list.
Dean, if you don't mind if I jump in, I think you skipped a step where you started saying, you were looking for industrial sites in South Carolina, and that's how you found this site. But I think
right.
The reason you were looking for industrial sites in South Carolina is based on kind of market screening factors. You identified Greenville as a focus market.
Yeah, I'm sorry. If you go back to that other page, I'll jump into that. I skipped over it for a second because I was going to circle back to it. The reason that Greenville is so important for light industrial and just jumping off of the site that you were just looking at, that is a former textile mill. And this area of South Carolina, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Georgia, it's basically like the four corners of the eastern United States, also called the upstate, is it was the textile capital of the world up until the late 60s, early 70s. And all the textiles started moving, all the mills and manufacturing started moving overseas. And as that happened, there was just a huge amount of blight and poverty that struck this area of the country. And South Carolina, to their credit, they were extremely smart and quick to act. And they created an international trade-free zone in the Greer kind of Spartanburg area. They introduced tons and tons of state tax credit benefits, and then chased after some of the world's largest companies. And as you can see here on this screen, BMW showed up about 20 years ago, and they opened up what is the X Series plant. So if you drive a BMW X Series vehicle, it comes from the Spartanburg plant, it's called the Greenville Spartanburg plant. It's actually in Greer. And the site that we're going to be talking about tonight is actually just behind this plant. It's literally the test track is, you can almost see it from the back side of this site. It's just up the hill, so that's why you can't see it. But then you can also see you've got GE here, where they build gas turbines. Lockheed Martin builds all of their F-16 fighter jets at an Air Force base that's just down the street from here as well, where it's basically a decommissioned Air Force base that's now private, but it's all federal. It's all federal companies or companies that are supplying GS type contracts and doing government work. And because of what's happened in this area, the other thing that is right down the street from the site we're going to talk about that's key to all of this is what's called the inland port at Greer. And while that's not on this screen, it's probably the most important aspect of all these things that are going on. And the reason is because you can see it's number one right next to the site location. And the reason that it's so important is because what happens with these manufacturing companies is that they have the ability to containerize their products, bring them to this port, and they go through customs, and they are put on a train by 4 p.m. today. They are on a boat and leaving the port of Charleston by 1 p.m. tomorrow. And so you're in a trade-free zone, and you're literally able to manufacture your goods and get them out to sea in less than 24 hours from this inland location, which provides for cheaper cost of living and more labor. So you're creating this boon of benefits for corporations to come and build their plants and or their assembly facilities in and around this area of Greenville, Spartanburg, as everybody calls it, which is the two counties. And we are literally on the county border.
Awesome. Thank you, Dean. So I hope that provides a good overview of both why we picked Greenville as a market, because it's such a robust job center, and also Dean's experience in the market, having developed a 250-acre major industrial redevelopment, as well as other projects in the market, which Dean didn't get a chance to discuss. So that's kind of high-level context on how we got to Greenville. We looked at the demand factors here, right? One of the estimates is that the market needs 88,000 new homes by 2040, just because population is growing so robustly. And then we found a really compelling site. We'll talk more about the site. And I want to talk about pre-tax returns. We'll go through those financial projections a little bit later in the webinar. And then the cherry on top is the opportunity zone tax status. When we discovered that, when Dean called me and Yoel a few months back and said, hey, I found a site, it's in Greenville, it's a stone's throw from the BMW plant and the inland port. I'm pretty darn sure that I can get a manufactured housing community approved here, and it's an opportunity zone. We looked at all those factors and we were like, okay, let's do this. Let's double down, let's spend the time, let's spend the effort, let's spend the money and try to make this project happen. So that's a high level overview of the project. And I hope it doesn't sound like I'm tooting our horn here, but if I step back and think about high level, what is this? I think you're getting a de-risked development project because we've already closed on the land, we've already gotten approvals, and we'll talk more about that. The market is a really strong market. You've got an expert sponsor team, Dean being a very seasoned developer who is deep in this market, and Yoel and I running Three Pillar Communities with a lot of expertise around how to fill up manufactured housing communities with new homes and how to operate those communities to a high standard. And then you've got opportunity zone tax benefits. So that to me is a deal in a nutshell. So, I'm not sure if it makes sense to, the order of the slides. Let's skip this one and let's, I think it makes sense to talk about the site a little bit more because we started that discussion and then go back to talk about the projections. So you spoke about the regional context here. Let's zoom in locally. And I
Sure.
want to talk about this slide here. I mean, I can also show the pictures of the site on the next page.
Yeah, sure. So if you start here, because somebody just asked a question about actually go out one, and then we'll come into this one. So someone had just asked a question about the airport. So on this slide, you can see where the number 2 is where the airport is. And so, based on where we're located, we're extremely close to the airport. And we're in a great location in the sense that you've got a lot of different manufacturing facilities that are job centers. And so there's a lot of activity around this area as far as the type of owners that we're going to likely have for this market, which is generally, a lot of blue collar, and you're going to want to be able to provide that housing, which right now, most of that housing that's available is a good 30 minutes to an hour drive. So making it where it's closer and easier for people to get to work is a real boon. And when we talk about the entitlements, I will tell you that that the town of Duncan that we were able to get annexed into is extremely excited about this project because of the idea that it's bringing housing for their workers. So if you want to zoom in a little closer, I'll get a little bit more granular. So what you can see, you see where the site location is. And if you look just a little bit like where in between the 4 and the 2, you can see the test track for BMW. So that's right there. And it's not noisy, just so that everybody knows. It's just that is where the test track is. It's actually really cool. If you ever get a chance, you can spend the day there and test drive BMWs. It's pretty intense. But around this site, you can see where the OP is, that's purple, that's right next to the site. That's Plastic Omnium. They are the largest supplier of plastic parts to the auto manufacturers in the world. So they have 15 facilities like this, and I believe they're building a couple of more around the world. So this is a pretty important facility for them because they don't just supply BMW from this facility, but they also supply other car manufacturing plants around the country or this part of the country from this plant. And directly across the street from us is where there's a really big Lowe's distribution center that was just built. So it's brand new. And you've got some other facilities that have all been built. There around us, there's not, other than Plastic Omnium, it's not as much manufacturing as it is distribution. But all those smaller buildings that you see with the white roofs, kind of near number 8, 6, 7, and 5, all of those areas, that's all the tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers to BMW, because they have to be in extremely close proximity in order to supply timely materials to the plant. So all of those rooftops, you're talking thousands and thousands and thousands of jobs.
Cool. You want to talk about the site itself?
Sure. So, so the site itself, there's some really interesting things about this site that make it really, I think, that help to make it a winner for us. So for example, the first thing you're seeing here is this home that was built in the early 2000s. We actually bought this house. It's part of the project. And what we're actually going to do with this house is we're adaptively reusing it, and we're going to turn it into our community center. So this will actually stay as a part of the project. We're going to build a pool behind the house. So kind of in the upper right-hand corner, you can see the back side of the house, and there'll be a pool back there. We're going to add some pickleball courts, a half basketball court. We'll have horseshoes and cornhole and other areas, picnic areas set up all around that back end of the community center. So it's really about amenitizing the area. One of the things that's interesting is right now, the way the site plan is laid out, we have this pond that you can see that's more like a lake. And it is naturally fed from upstream and then continues down into a creek on the outfall structure on the other side. We just had an initial meeting today with a contractor, and we do have an exemption letter from the state of South Carolina that may allow us to remove the pond if we so choose, because it was originally built for agricultural purposes. That's important, and I tell you this because what it may allow us to do is, it may allow us to potentially increase our unit count on the site. If not for anything else, if we can drain it, it will give us more flexibility with the site. So we might be able to make some modifications before we pull our land disturbance permits. So what we're talking about now is kind of how we're going to phase the building of the project in order to take advantage of this potential new area that may increase our overall usable uplands. And this is, I mean, this is maybe a little too granular for this conversation tonight, but I think it's just important for everybody to understand how even after we come up with a site plan and we take it through entitlements and get it approved, it doesn't mean that we stop at that point, and don't look for other opportunities to increase value as we go. It's part of being a good developer and doing the right thing for the site and your investors is to continue to press the project and try and figure out the best way to keep it moving forward, and create additional value.
Yeah. So I just want to pick up your Dean a little bit and talk more about the type of product we plan to build. Some of you folks are familiar with manufactured housing. Some of you might not be very familiar or might have stereotypes in your head that are not very accurate. So we plan to build a really nice, for lack of a better word, manufactured housing community. I would call it a Class A community, basically to residential subdivision standards. So, we'll have asphalt or concrete roads that look like a subdivision. We'll have concrete curb and gutter, nice street lights, an amenities center, as Dean was describing, with a pool and pickleball courts. We are exploring the viability of putting walking trails throughout the community. Each home site will have a concrete driveway. We'll do majority double wide manufactured homes. The picture here is illustrative. So I'm not saying our homes will have these exact interior or exterior features. Not clear to me that we'll do site-built garages like what you see here. That may end up being too expensive for this particular property. But this will give you a look and feel of what we're trying to build. And, imagine you are a blue-collar worker, as Dean said, working in a factory or in a distribution center. And you might have been, renting an apartment for, let's say, $1,200 or $1,300 a month. Buying a new home in the, $280,000 to $350,000 range might be out of reach for you. But buying a new manufactured home in a great community like this, in the kind of low to mid $100,000 price range is really compelling. And residents love our product. They love having their own driveway to park on right in front of their front door, so they're not walking up steps like in an apartment. They love having their own private front yard and backyard. They love owning a home. Our residents love not sharing walls or a roof or a ceiling with their neighbors. It's much more privacy. So this is a product that consumers love. And if you look at the market in Greenville, there are essentially, I think it's a close to zero vacancy rate in the existing manufactured housing communities in the market. So Dean, you want to talk a little bit about the approval process and the fact that we've already gotten approvals here, and to what extent those still could change if we want to push it.
Yeah, so as far as pushing it goes, and I'll circle back to the approvals in a second. Just let me get this out because I think it's
Mhm.
important. Is we're approved for 247 manufactured home sites. Um, that being said, those approvals allow for a non-substantial modification, and so a non-substantial modification has been deemed based on the size of the site to be about 30 home sites. So we could fluctuate up to, above and below that number by 30 without having a major modification to our site plan approval. So that, which is important when we talk about things like the removal of the pond and potentially increasing the overall space to maybe get a couple of extra manufactured home sites. Same thing with just kind of shifting things around. So with the approval, what we did was we acquired this site where it was, we were still in a subject to kind of position, meaning that purchasing the site was still subject to getting the approvals in place. And so we worked our way through getting annexed from, this was unincorporated land in the county of Spartanburg. We got it annexed into the town of Duncan. And while we were getting annexed, we also got it zoned for manufactured housing with a site plan approval attached to it, which is the site plan that we have here in the presentation of the 247 manufactured housing lots. So taking all of those different aspects, what that does is it creates a complete package so that you are, sorry about that, so that you are fully entitled. And that's important because the the idea is that you really don't, if you can ever create a scenario by which you're not already owning a piece of property before you have the entitlements, you want to try and do that. Because when we talk about de-risking, which is a word that Daniel used earlier, that's really the nexus of what I think is important for us to do for you as investors, is to try and take as much risk out of the equation as possible. There are many things that we can't control. We can't control, SOFR and LIBOR. We can't, we don't have control over global events. But what we can control, we try to. And that's what we've done here. And that really is part of setting us up for the highest likelihood of success with projects, is trying to pick the right location based on all these other factors that you've heard us talk about. And then layering on top of that, these entitlements and making sure that we've already got all the entitlements in place. Another piece of those entitlements is also looking at the availability of water and sewer and what all of those other factors look like, because those add to cost of construction. And so at this particular site, we actually, there's a small piece of land out at the northern tip of the property, which happens to also be the low point, and there is a lift station there. So that lift station belongs to the town of Lyman, which it's very confusing in this one little area. But essentially, the town of Lyman actually takes care of the sewage in this particular area of the county for the town of Duncan. So we are able to gravity feed this entire site to this lift station. And what's great about that is a huge cost saver for construction purposes. We have the polar opposite of that on our Bozeman project, where we're running literally like 3 miles of gravity fed and force mains to and from a lift station. We're doing all kinds of huge civil work just in order to be able to deal with our sewage. This particular site, we can feed everything to a municipal lift station. So there are some real cost-saving advantages that are built into this site and its location. And those are also things that we look at in order to try and de-risk a project.
So Dean, are you basically saying that shit rolls downhill?
Yes, it does.
Let me jump in with answering two audience questions. And guys, keep the Q&A coming. So Andy Ghetto, who's a respected colleague in the managed housing industry, asked a couple of basic questions about the business model that we probably should have described more thoroughly. So Andy asked, which manufacturers will we work with to bring the homes in, and how do we finance our homes to the end customer? So let me just describe the business model a little bit. So we're buying land, we've gotten entitlements, we'll go and build out what we call the horizontal construction, building the infrastructure and the roads to the point where we have lots that look similar to the lots you'd see in a single family subdivision. Then we operate a manufactured home dealership that's called Amber Homes. We're licensed in 10 states. We're currently getting our license in South Carolina. I'm probably gonna fly there myself to take the dealer's exam in a few weeks. And we will procure home inventory directly from manufacturers who we work with. So we work with all the major manufacturers in the country: Clayton Homes, Fleetwood, Champion, Cavco, you name it, Skyline, you name it. We're currently talking to, one nice thing about this site is it's in pretty close proximity to a lot of factories, specifically manufactured home plants. So there's 5 or 6 different plants that we can potentially pull from, including both Clayton and Fleetwood plants, as well as Champion. And so we're in discussion with them to figure out what's the best pricing and product spec. And very likely we'll pull from a number of factories so that we can fill up the property faster. So just to continue with that thought, we work with the factories, we design the right homes, we order the homes, we truck the homes from the factory to the site, we oversee installation, and we set up a sales center to run sales to customers, right, who come in who are looking to buy a home. The customer purchases that home. Sometimes we get cash buyers, but in this community, which is an all ages workforce type community, I expect most buyers will finance the purchase. We refer them out to third-party lenders who we work with closely on a national basis, like 21st Mortgage, Cascade, Triad, and Credit Human. Because we're doing high volume in this market, we'll also see if we can develop kind of specialized lending relationships with local banks or credit unions, which is what we're doing in our Bozeman development project. Going to a credit union saying, hey, we've got an awesome new property. This is not a traditional trailer park, right? This is a really nice land lease community. Can you develop an appropriate lending program here with an appropriate interest rate and appropriate leverage for our home buyers, and see if we can get our buyers, preferential terms. Ultimately, our home buyer closes on their purchase of the home. They become a home owner. That's a valuable asset that should appreciate over time and help our residents create wealth. And we, as the community owner, get lot rent every month, right? The resident owns the home, we own the land, and the resident pays us rent every month to sit on the lot. So I hope that just clears up some of the basic business model questions. And guys, please do keep the Q&A coming. Thomas Holtzing asked here, how does the dealership revenue factor into investor returns? So our baseline model assumes 0 profit from home sales. That is, we believe, a conservative assumption. If the dealership actually does turn a profit from these home sales, that will, of course, increase return. So our upside case shows, I believe, 5K or possibly 10K in profit per home sale. And in some markets that we operate in, we're making 100K plus per home sale. I don't think that will happen here, but it will. If it's profitable, it will just be additional upside on the deal. So let me talk about the homes a little bit more. I set up the Amber Homes dealership. I used to do all the home orders myself before the company grew. So this is stuff that's near and dear to my heart. I would say that I'm a manufactured home enthusiast. It's not just my job. I'm actually passionate about this. And to me, it's just amazing. Well, first of all, it's mind-boggling that so many homes in this country are built on site in a really inefficient way, which drives up the cost of housing. And it is so logical to build your home in a factory with less material waste. It's better for the environment. You can build in any type of weather conditions, and you can build faster and cheaper, right? And ultimately that translates to a great affordable product for the home buyer. So, this is not grandma's trailer, right? This is not a 1960s or 1970s aluminum sided single wide that I sometimes call, the sardine can mobile home. This is a quality manufactured home built to federal standards, which are governed by HUD, the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development. You'll see here we have nice exterior siding, board and bat exteriors, window shades, architectural features, roof dormers on the exterior. On the interior, just showed a picture of the bathroom here. Really nice tile showers, with glass shower enclosures as an option. His and hers sinks. And in the kitchen, we've got pendant lights, farmhouse sinks, buffet counters. People walk into the homes and there's a wow factor. You don't have to spend a ton of money to get that wow factor either. If you're strategic about the features that you pick, like pendant lights in the kitchen, for example, the farmhouse sink, stainless steel appliances, people walk in, they say, wow, that's what kind of motivates the decision to purchase. And let's talk about affordability a little bit. So, we created a chart here comparing our projected home sale prices to other alternatives in the market. So we can sell, and we're very confident that we can sell a new single wide for $99,000. Some folks in the market are selling new single wides for closer to $70,000. Right? So for us, adding a nicer spec and getting to the quality level we want, we think it will be closer to that 100K price point. But hey, if we enter a recession, if interest rates are really high, if we find that home buyers are struggling to afford that home, we can always reduce the spec. We expect to sell double wides for somewhere between 120K and 140K. And look at how that compares to the price to buy a previously owned site-built home. That picture here of a previously owned site-built home is, we pulled it from Zillow last week. That's a current listing. It's 5 or 10 miles from the park, and that's representative of the quality that you'll find in the market. And if you get into the 300s range, you can buy a new site-built home. So, we're talking about selling a really nice new home with a double wide, which is, roughly 1,400 square feet or more, comparable size to that stick-built house, but 40% of the price. So there's a lot of value here for the consumer and a lot of what I call an affordability cushion, if the economy enters a rocky spot. If you look at it in terms of all-in monthly payments, we're assuming an 8% interest rate for our home buyers. I hope rates will drop, but for now, that's our assumption. And that translates to roughly $1,400 a month all in for someone buying a single wide, and a little under $1,800 a month for someone buying a double wide. It's significantly cheaper than buying a conventional site-built home, and it's in the same range as renting an apartment. But in our case, our resident owns the home, they build equity, and they don't share walls with neighbors, as I discussed. They get private driveway and backyard, and people really like the product. I'm seeing some Q&A here about tornado risk and other hurricane risk, which is obviously on everyone's mind given recent events in Florida. Dean, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. So, the first thing is that part of and you touched on this a little bit when you talked about the sardine can. Part of the problem with the manufactured housing community and people's understanding of the homes is there's a huge divergence between a mobile home and a manufactured home, which started in, I believe it was 1974, when mobile homes were no longer allowed to be created, and HUD stepped in, the federal government stepped in, and certain standards got set, and you ended up with manufactured homes. Now, since that time, there have been ongoing improvements that have happened within the industry and in construction in general. I remember Hurricane Andrew flattened an area in South Florida called Country Walk that was all homes built by Lennar. These are stick-built homes, and they were all gone, 100% gone. The entire, I don't know, a couple thousand home community. And from that, the building code changed, and homes started being built differently after that, stick-built homes. But same thing with manufactured homes. So because they're tied to IBC, which is the International Building Code, and they're tied to certain standards, and I'm inadvertently using the word tied because it's a pun, but they are they are lockstep with all of the most modern building code regulations that are constantly being updated. And that was part of the difference between a mobile home and a manufactured home. But what that also means, going back to the tornado and hurricane standards, is the way in which the homes are anchored to the ground. Yes, they don't have a traditional foundation. However, the way in which they're set, which is tied to what the state building code requires, and there may be more stringent standards set by the local authority having jurisdiction, the AHJ. But those standards are part of the process of actually attaching these homes to the surface of the ground. And when you do that, so there's strapping systems and the like that are used. And these anchoring systems are designed to meet certain wind loads. And those wind loads are based on the location that you're at. So in this particular area of the world, you have to deal with tornadoes and hurricanes. So those wind loads are taken into account, and they're factored into what's approved for anchoring these homes to the ground. So all of that is in place, and it's part of the building code, and that's what you have to follow. And it's, like I said, it's very different from what happened in the past. And regrettably, on the news, it's one of those things that they love to show, that they like to find the 1960s, 1970s trailer park that has these really old, crappy mobile homes that got destroyed. But those are not the same product that we're talking about. And it's a misnomer.
Absolutely. Dean, we also have a question from John Snow, who asked, given the industrial nature of the neighborhood, is there a problem with truck traffic and related noise?
No. So first of all of the there are trucks, but the trucks are, they're semis coming in and out of facilities. So then they would be driving down that main street. We'll have a buffer zone. So it'd be no different than, you living on any other street. I mean, I will tell you, I live on an extremely busy street in South Florida. So I probably have more traffic than this street will ever have in front of my home. And I live in a nice house. So, I think that with a proper landscape buffer, the traffic that's happening on Genoble Road, which is the street that it's on, is irrelevant. And then these are not the warehouses that have been built, the manufacturing facilities that are around this site. They're all brand new, and they're state of the art. So you've got, like, the Lowe's facility was just built, and it is a gorgeous building. I think it's 40-foot high tilt-up walls. They've got some office space there. Plastic Omnium is, I think, right around the same height. They're really, really Class A product all around there. So I don't think that that'll be an issue. And on top of that, there are still quite a few residential homes that are in the area. And there are some residential developments that are, a couple of, I would say blocks, but it was all farmland recently. So the way that it's shaped is not really blocks, but there are quite a few developments of homes in and around the area, stick built.
Cool.
I would also think, Dean, that like the most of the truck traffic would be happening during the workday when most people are going to be at work and at school, and the quieter evenings would probably correlate with the time people are staying and spending time in their homes.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yep.
So guys, I'm looking at the clock. I want to keep this to an hour to respect people's time. We've got about 13 minutes left. So I'm going to try and pick up the pace a little bit, at least go through some of the financial projections and the exit strategy, and try and leave a few minutes at the end for Q&A. So as we noted, our property is located in an opportunity zone. I won't try and go into all the details of the tax benefits on this webinar. That could, I think, be a whole entire webinar in itself. But to summarize it really briefly, if you invest a qualified capital gain into this deal, there are significant tax benefits. You get to defer your capital gains tax until 2026 on the gain that you invest into the deal. And then when we exit, if we hold the deal for at least 10 years, your capital gain will not be taxed. And that can translate to, roughly 40% additional cash in your pocket at the end of the day versus a non-OZ investment. I have gotten a few questions from folks. Am I allowed to invest in this deal if I'm not investing qualified capital gains? The answer is yes. We'll have, essentially two classes of investors. And we'll differentiate between the people who are investing qualified gains and are getting the tax status, and the folks who are investing, after tax. Here's kind of a quick project summary, base case, describing, we're raising roughly $6.5 million in equity, roughly $12 million in debt. We're having active conversations with construction lenders in the market. That debt will go primarily towards land development. We have separate lines of credit that we use to bring in the manufactured home inventory. We expect, Dean, we were discussing earlier today, have approved construction drawings and a land disturbance permit by probably late December or January. It's reasonable to think that we'll be breaking ground in February and hopefully selling our first homes, by kind of mid to late 2023. We've modeled out here annual projections. I'm happy to answer questions on this, but this kind of will give an indication into our home sales velocity. We're expecting, 75 home sales in year 2, and then kind of tapering after that. Planning a refi event in year 5, which would deliver a lot of cash flow to investors, essentially returning all invested capital if our projections are correct. And then the strategy is long-term hold. I think, we plan to hold for at least 10 years in order to capture the full set of opportunity zone tax benefits. And after 10 years, our assumption is that we'll hold for another 20 or 30 or 40 years. That's our strategy within this asset class. That's been our plan going in on basically every deal that we've bought so far. We'd like to hold generationally. And I think that aligns our interests with interests of our residents. That being said, we're not ostriches with our head in the sand. We have sold several assets opportunistically. If you get an offer you can't refuse, every asset should be for sale.
Also, there's a possibility that, unlike most of our properties, we would consider recapitalizing, which is kind of selling the property to other investors that would realize the full appreciation, but also return investors with their opportunity zone benefits. So after 10 years, there's another option to get the full benefit, which would be all the capital gains that would come out of the sale would be non-taxable, but we would still hold on to the property. We being 3 pillars, but we bring other capital to basically buy out the investors who were in it to begin with.
Mm-hmm. So what does that translate to in terms of returns for investors? So you'll see here that we show a base case, an upside case, and a downside case. And our base case is assuming no home sale profits. It's assuming 5 home sales per month and $575 a month lot rents. Upside case assumes 10K in profit per home sale, a little bit faster home sale velocity, and a little bit higher rents. And the downside case, you can see here, is assuming 4 sales a month, a little bit slower. We then show 2 different, basically, exit scenarios. One is a projected sale in year 6, which is not what we're planning to do, but we wanted to enable an apples to apples comparison with other real estate development deals, which are typically, modeling an exit after you've built the thing and stabilized it, right? And so if we were to sell in year 6, our IRRs would be higher. If we hold for 10 years, it's kind of just a function of the math that a longer hold will depress IRR marginally. So if we sell in year 10, or so we're actually planning, IRR is roughly 200 basis points lower. And if we're in our base case on our rent and home sales projections, and kind of our middle case for a cap rate, which is a 4.5 cap, that would generate a 15.7% IRR net to investors and a 2.6x equity multiple. And if you put $1 into the deal, you get $2.60 back cumulatively. So we've got about 5 minutes left. I think I should pause there and ask Dean and Yoel, did I leave out anything crucial that we should discuss here? And then let's go to Q&A in the last few minutes.
I'm trying to keep up with the Q&A and I'm falling behind. So I think we can take a couple from the Q&A.
Let's do it. Q&A.
Great. So Archie Worthen is familiar with mobile home parks in Colorado. He's experienced. He said it's becoming increasingly difficult to sell this asset class, and there are increased demands on property owners. Can you please comment on this regard, as well as the general feeling in South Carolina? Oh, Archie, I am so glad you asked this question. We too own mobile home parks in Colorado, and it's freaking hard because we are doing really hard work to improve communities and provide high quality affordable housing. And folks on the left side of the political spectrum just slap us in the face every single day and impose a lot of really tough regulations that make it hard to operate and hard to sell parks. So I feel you. I've been active on this. I testified in the Colorado State Legislature on this point. I've written op-eds on this. And I'm happy to say South Carolina is night and day. I think it will indicate the fact that, Dean, how long did it take you to get this project entitled? Was it 2 months total?
Yeah, it was about, yeah. They're in South Carolina when the politicals decide they want to get something done, or they like what a developer is pushing, they get right behind you and they push it right through. And that's what happened here.
Yeah. And in terms of ease of operation, I anticipate, the likelihood of rent control here as being slim to none. It's not really something we're thinking about in this jurisdiction, whereas in Colorado, it's a real business risk. So generally, I think South Carolina's pro-business and pro-development attitude is one of the reasons we really like this project.
Yeah.
My cousin and investor, David Schulman, asks, when do you anticipate the first distribution? I can go back to the model. Yoel, can you speak to that?
Yeah. Honestly, immaterially, small distributions should start in late year 2, early year 3 from park NOI, as we're generating rent. But it's not going to get kind of material to late year 3, year 4 as we start to fill up more spaces, and then it should grow from there.
Well, actually, and just to not to jump on anybody's toes, but we'll actually have to hold that until sometime after we're into year 2, because you can't, if anything that you receive back from the OZ before you've been in it for 2 years is ordinary income, and could violate. You're only allowed 1 footfall with an OZ, so you could violate some of the, again, nuanced. You could violate some of the rules with the OZ. So you have to get beyond the 2 years. which is also why you don't want to refi. Now,
Right.
we purchased at the end of August of 2022. So basically we have to make it past August of 2024. And after
Yeah.
that point, then that conversation can ensue.
So the model shows that year one would generate, year two would generate a 1% return, but like Dean said, there's restrictions around being able to distribute that. And then it gets about 5%. And then in year five, we distribute 123% of investor capital from a refinancing.
Keith asked me, or asked us, how much of the $6.5 million equity is from the sponsor group? We plan to put in at least 200,000, potentially more. Yo and I both need to buy houses right now, so we don't have a ton of cash to throw around, but at least 200K, possibly more. My parents might come in for a chunk above that as well. Joseph Willen asked, who's our buyer of the asset? So like we said, our default plan is a multi-decade hold. That being said, there is a very robust market of buyers for Class A manufactured housing communities and growth markets. This is, contrary to what some people might think, this is no longer a mom and pop asset class. It has leapfrogged from being a mom and pop asset class to a highly institutionalized asset class, where most of the big real estate investment managers in the U.S., like Blackstone and Brookfield and Prudential, and I could go on and on, are involved in this asset class in some way, shape, or form. So there's the publicly traded REIT buyers like Sun Communities and Equity Lifestyles and UMH. There's the private equity backed groups. There are groups that are backed by pension funds, and there's the private capital groups. So there's a really robust market of potential buyers.
Yeah, and also where the existing asset classes that Three Pillar buys vary in size based on opportunistic purchases. So there may be an instance where the park only has 60 spaces, but it's a mom and pop that are looking to get out of the business, or they're retiring, or it's a dilapidated park, and there's some kind of add value there. The difference between that portion of the Three Pillar business model and what's going on there and what we're doing with the new development side is that as part of our mission statement, if you will, we try to focus on sites that are at or around 40 acres and up. And the reason that size is important to us as far as the land is because that gets us to the threshold of 200 or more units. And so if you think about multifamily and you think about the classification of asset classes and who buys what, institutional investors will only look at multifamily that is generally over 200 units. And now these days it's moved up to 250 and 300 units. But that's where it kind of started off, 15, 20 years ago. So we're looking at the new development sites in a similar kind of format, where trying to be at that 200 and up range puts you in a class where it could be a family office that's interested. It could be institutional investors, but we're right in that sweet spot size-wise of where it gives us the most flexibility down the road.
Well said. So Robin Bottmiller asks, given the volatility in debt capital markets, how certain are we that we can get construction financing? And what happens if it doesn't come through? So debt markets are wacky right now, right? And I don't want to pretend that I have a crystal ball and I'm omniscient and so smart. Like we knew rates were rising, but I'd say we've been surprised over the last 2 weeks by how rapidly they rose in like a 10-day period. That being said, I feel like one of the big mitigants to that risk on this project is how quickly we've gotten approvals, how quickly the permitting process will happen and how quickly we can actually get a shovel in the ground. So, we should actually start, generating some initial revenue from this project, in 12 months from now or less than that. And that to me indicates that we can always find some form of viable debt for this project. If it's not a conventional bank or credit union, then there are debt funds or others who will lend on it, and that debt might be 8 or 9% or 10% or some other, ugly number that I don't like thinking about. But if we have to pay that for, a 12-month period until the project is rolling, I think we'll be fine. And then what about a case where the bridge loan isn't repaid, but new investors close? I think you're talking about the current $3.5 million bridge loan that we used to purchase the property. We've got other sources of capital that we can use to backfill if needed. So I think no matter what, we will be able to repay that bridge loan and investors will be able to come in on the deal. And then Sam Schulman asks, who will be running the project on the ground day to day? Do they have local connections? So let's kind of discuss our team and how we organize our development efforts. So think of the brain trust as being the three folks on this call, kind of choosing assets and setting strategy. Dean is our director of development. You can see he's got deep expertise in working with municipalities, picking the contractors, picking the team, designing the site plan, and really overseeing all of the efforts kind of from soup to nuts. Reporting to Dean on our team is Richard Lundstrom. He's our director of construction. He has roughly 30 years of construction experience, maybe more than that. And about half of that has been spent in manufactured housing. He has built parks from the ground up. He's installed manufactured homes. So he is based on the West Coast, but he flies periodically to our development projects to oversee the contractors and oversee progress on the ground. Then we will hire a local on-site sales manager to staff our sales center, who will report up to our director of home sales. And then we will eventually hire an on-site community manager who's local on the ground. So guys, with that, we're 5 minutes past the hour. I think we answered all the questions here. I'm seeing 28 answered questions. So Dean, Yoel, any parting thoughts here?
Yeah, I actually do have one, because when you were talking about financing and the spikes in the interest rates that have happened recently, one of the things that has done already, we've already seen, is that there are some projects that haven't started. There's other projects that have moved forward. The logistics of materials has loosened up some because of that, and some just because we've caught up. That's also allowed prices on materials to come down. So one of the things that I always see with banks is that they're always busy looking for the next catastrophic event that they can hang their hat on and say, oh, that's why we're not lending, kind of thing. But the reality is there's always going to be something. There's always going to be the next COVID, the next Zika, right? There's always going to be something that's going on out there in the world. The Ukraine, take your pick. There's always something. If you are able to buy a piece of property at the right price, which I think that we did, and you are able to create a scenario by which you have built in as much of the safety nets that you can possibly do, then you've created a scenario by which the project can be successful, and that these are long-term projects. And in a very, very worst case scenario, you could take a project like this all the way to the point where you're ready to put shovels in the ground and then pause if necessary. That being said, the other thing that's so advantageous about projects like this versus vertical projects like apartment buildings and the like is that you also can build these out in phases where you could always build a certain portion of the site and get it up and running just to cover the debt, and then continue to build the site as you go. So there's a lot of different strategies that come into play, along with the fact that I have seen, because I live this day in and day out, material prices are loosening up and schedules are also loosening up some from the contractors. And all of that inures to our benefit, where even if interest rates go up, we could see our construction pricing coming down. And so I'm not saying that it means that we would make more money because of the interest rate factor, but it could be an equilibrium between the two. So I'll leave you with that.
I guess the one thing I'd add is, as we're talking about this, I'm thinking of something we didn't include. As Daniel talked about, manufactured housing development is pretty rare. Not to say it's not done. We've seen, I think, outside of Texas, where it's happening more, you see a couple deals, I don't know, a year that are happening. And when you see these deals, interesting the baseline, like what the cost per pad is on just the land, and we call it entitled or paper lots. And generally, the ballpark we're looking at is between $20,000 and $30,000, depending on the market and the quality. And when we look at being at a basis,
sorry, just to clarify, per paper lot.
Per paper lot, $20,000 to $30,000 is what we're seeing, and 30,000, sometimes more, like Dallas, Texas, is pretty popular. 20,000 would be something more tertiary or secondary. Coming in at, I think, 12,000 a lot is a really strong entry basis point. Where we feel like we've bought at the right price, we've entitled at the right price, and like the risk there is gone. Like Dean said, is like, if we were to turn around and try and flip this, we've already, I think, made money on the entitlements and having a product that can be built at a really compelling price.
I agree. Okay, guys. Well, thank you everyone who joined the webinar today. We appreciate you taking the time to get to know us. If you are interested in investing, you can email investorrelations@threepillarcommunities.com, and we'll get you set up on next steps. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time. We'll talk soon.